G'day. On a recent video, Mark one of the viewers made a comment about how do you set a workshop up for people with disabilities. It was an interesting question because, for a start, the difference between disability and the constraints put on you by aging sometimes don't differ all that much. You know, as you get old, you can't perhaps lift as much, or you can't bend as easily, or you haven't got the mobility, or that sort of thing. So in today's video, I'm going to run through a few things which, if you're getting old or you've got a disability, might be of help to you. And certainly, it's one of those things you need to think about now rather than later, because if you think about it later, you might find that, well, basically it is too late. You can't change things the way you want them and all that sort of thing. One of the things that we say is, in my TAD work, is every disability is different. And by that we mean that something that, even if you've got the same condition as someone or other else, you might find that something that works for one person doesn't work for another person, personal preference, all that sort of thing. So one of the things that, these are general statements I'm going to be making, and general suggestions, and you have to look at them and decide, what works for you. It'll depend a bit on your space, it'll depend on what sort of money you've got, whether you've got people who can help you set things up, all that sort of stuff. One thing I would recommend is you concentrate on doing the things that give you pleasure, right? So if you're really into welding, maybe you don't need, a whole bunch of machining stuff or something like that. Concentrate on the stuff that you like doing and set up to do that. Now, throughout this, I'm probably going to be referring to things in mainly in metric measurements, and for those in imperial countries, mainly the US, also the UK perhaps, 1 metre is 3 foot and 4 inches, so roughly 3 foot, and a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So when I talk about something weighing a kilogram or two, you have to do the conversion. I may do some of that, but we'll see how we go. I've broken this into, I've got a list down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 areas, and so I'll just be basically stepping through those, and make of it what you will. The first thing on my list is environment, and we're here because I've got that. It's a control panel for a swamp cooler up in the roof, but I find that just on those really hot days, it helps cool things down. And if you're in a cooler climate, then maybe you need a heater in there. But the last thing you want to be doing is being uncomfortable when you're in a workshop, okay? Because when you're younger, maybe you can jump and leap around a bit, but as you get older, that gets a little less desirable. So, heating, cooling, important stuff to have. Similarly, I've got a little stool I use when I weld, and depending on what you want to do and all that sort of thing, it may be worthwhile thinking about some form of seating, whether it's a bar stool because you need to be up high, or whether it's a lower stool, up to you. And similarly, although most machine tools, lathes, mills, all that sort of thing aren't used with seating, there's nothing saying that you can't have a seat or something like that to take some pressure off your legs if that's what you want to do. Similarly, for your comfort, if you've got limited mobility, you might like to think about having a small fridge in the shed, as well as storing glues and things like batteries, that sort of stuff in there. You can also keep some drinks in there, so that if you get thirsty during the day, you don't have to walk all the way back up to the house. You can have something on hand. And the last thing that I probably should mention is communications with the outside world. I know that my wife gets concerned if she doesn't hear from me for a while, and so every so often I'll stick my head around the door and say hello and find out how she's doing, all that sort of thing. But one of the things you might want to think about is an intercom or a baby monitor or fall alarms, all that sort of stuff, so that people know that you're all right, or can be told if you're not all right. Next on my list of things to think about is ease of access. By ease of access, I mean both being able to get somewhere, but also being able to get the things you want easily. And so if you're in a wheelchair or have a walking frame or something like that, you'll need to make sure that the aisles are wide enough in your workspace that you can maneuver easily enough. Another thing to think about is having storage of accessories within reasonable reach. You don't want to have things right down the floor. So next to my mill, I've got my clamp kit, okay, and above the vise, where I most often use them, I've got what I refer to as my filing cabinet, and it's just a cabinet with files in it, so that if I'm working here and I need a file, I can just reach up and get one, rather than going all the way across the workshop to a drawer with other odds and sods. You also need to have storage for spares and consumables. So over here, I've got all my oil cans and things. Once again, because I use them mainly with the mill, they're next to the mill. You want to make sure you minimise clutter so that you don't have things you're tripping over, all that sort of stuff. You also need to think about how you set things up, how you pack things up, so that you're not spending half your time packing everything away or pulling everything in. So I've got lots of trolleys on wheels so that I can just sort of wheel them back where they go to and wheel them out when I want to use them. And the final thing with your setup is watch out for rust. A lot of people like shadow boards. I don't like them myself because it's another place where dust can settle, where condensation can occur and things can rust. But if a shadow board is your style, you go for it. But just, remember, you want things clear, easy to get to, that if for some reason you don't get out to your workspace for a couple of months, you don't have to worry about everything having rusted away. The next thing to think about is lighting and being able to see things, particularly if your site, like mine is not as good as it used to be. You might want to have things like magnifying glasses. Now this one's a desk mount arrangement with a light underneath, but you can buy these sorts of things, and sometimes they're worth having because they can help. I've got a lot of light in here because I use this for filming, but there's nothing saying that if you're having trouble seeing things, a bit more light doesn't hurt. One thing to think about is emergency lighting. Particularly if you've got a cluttered shop and all that sort of thing, or you work right away from a window or a door or something like that and you can't see too well, you might want something that when the power goes out, it automatically comes on to light up the areas. Remember too, your eyes take time to adjust to differing light levels, so you don't want to go outside from a bright space inside to a dimly lit space and be able to expect to see. So that's another reason for boosting your interior light levels. Next on my list is physical handling. I've got a hoist back here, I've got a scissor lift table, I'll show you those in a minute. But one thing I would like to show you, these are used in industry. This is called a spring balance, or spring balancer, sorry. And it's got a spiral shaped groove on it with a cable in it, and it increases in diameter, and it's got a torsional spring in there. You can adjust this. This one's a 2.5 to 5 kilogram lift, but what that means is you can have something like this lump of steel sitting here, and you can adjust this so that you can move that up and down, and it'll actually hold it, well, pretty much in the spot where you want it, depending on how well you've got things adjusted. So if you've got something like an electric drill or something like that, which you find is difficult to hold, then maybe something like that on a gantry is a worthwhile thing. I would actually suggest using something like a bench drill if you're having trouble, because you've still got the reaction force to have to cope with. This becomes another option for either lifting heavy loads or people who can't lift heavy loads anymore. This is a little hoist. This came from Bunnings, local big box store. They are available elsewhere, but this will lift up to 100 kilograms. One bit of gear to consider is a scissor lift table. These are handy for two reasons. One is they can lift from about here up to about there somewhere, which comes in handy. But the other thing is I use this for is a sort of a height adjustable work table. So here I've just been doing some welding. This is just at a nice height for me to work at. They're worthwhile considering. In an industrial setting, you might get something like an I-beam, and have a thing called a girder trolley on it, and that's basically, it's two little wheels sit either side of the flange and go along the beam. This thing here is related to that. These are commonly called a pipe trolley, and as you can see, they roll on a bit of pipe. Now, a bit of pipe is far easier to set up in the home workshop, but once again, it gives you something then that you can attach a hoist to, or a counterbalance, or something like that, which can help you out. A couple of ways you can set up for gantries, that sort of thing. If you're just after a single axis, like over a bench, probably the easiest way to do that is a bit of wire or cable, which is anchored at each end, and then just have something like a pulley sitting over the top, which can go back and forth. You can also use garage door, sliding door track. You could do the same thing there. If you wanted a two-dimensional gantry, using that, once again, it's only for light stuff, but then again, that's not such a terrible thing. You could have a piece there and a piece there with the rollers, and then have another piece across that with another roller. This is sort of an isometric view, so you can get movement that way as well as that way. And the reason you have two there is just to make it a bit more stable. But there are a couple of ways you could set up an easy gantry. Finally, some miscellaneous bits and pieces. One of the things I'd suggest in a workshop is something like a whiteboard, because it means you can write things down, whether it be a dimension that you're aiming for, or who's borrowed your 12-inch shifter, or whatever the story is. Means you don't have to rely on memory or find bits of paper under place. Normally I'd be very reluctant to suggest this, but if you have a vise and you're losing strength, then maybe a bit of pipe as a cheater bar. You've got to be careful that you don't damage the vise, but it's something to think about if you need just a little bit of help to get the vise tight. Another thing to think about is handles on bits of equipment. There's nothing saying you can't put a bigger handle on something, or a nicer handle. These were just a short fixed handle. I've got a swivelly one here, which I find is just a little bit nicer for moving back and forth, as well as being able to fold it up. But that sort of stuff, not a bad idea. The other nice thing about folding it up is I can get past here without bumping into it a lot of the time. One thing that does get a lot of complaints is having to change speeds on things like drill presses. Swapping belts around the place, yeah, it can take up a bit of time and call for a bit of manual dexterity. So one thing that a number of people I know have done is they've put a three-phase motor on the back and put a VFD on there. It won't give you the full speed range, but it'll mean you can change the speed range a little bit, which may mean that you don't have to change belts as often. The last couple of things I've got on my list are things like power feed on machine tools. Now, if you've got a lathe with manual feed and that suits you, that's fine, but you may feel that it's worthwhile, should we say, trading up with something with power feed on the axis, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time, cranking and keeping a steady rate. You can buy add-ons for mills and things like that. Lathes are a bit tricky. You may have to go to a slightly larger model, but there's not a great downside to that except for cost. So there's things like that. Another thing to think about is CNC. There are CNC plasma cutters like Arc Droids out there, and none of these names I'm mentioning are sponsored, by the way. 3D printing is another one, which is getting better and better. So, if you enjoy metal, then you're basically stuck with doing metally things. But if you just like making bits to make mechanisms, then maybe a 3D printer is worth thinking about. If you want to be able to cut stuff out without having to worry so much about having the shakes when you're holding a cutting torch, maybe a CNC cutter is worth thinking about, or a CNC router. These things are available around the place. I think I checked on an Arc Droid the other day and it was about 4,000 Australian. It'd be nice if it was way cheaper, but that's sometimes what you get. The last one is, I was asked specifically about drawbars for mills. Now, I haven't got one. If I can find one, I'll put a link down below. Every so often you see someone who's put a pneumatic device on their mill to do the drawbar up and down. You know, and that's not so much, I guess, for the physical effort, although that could be part of it. But sometimes these are, you know, these things are high up, so maybe you know, you want some form of conversion kit for that. Then again, maybe it's a matter of having a step or something that you can keep by the side of your mill, so that when you need to undo the drawbar, you've got some way of getting up there. Anyway, these are just some thoughts on how to set up a workshop for ageing and disability. Hopefully it's useful for some, and we'll see you for the next video.